everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Kid Icarus, brought to us by Nintendo. Kid Icarus was a first-hand title from Nintendo, and actually was developed right after the original Metroid. It also shares many of the same creators as Metroid, including Gunpei Yokoi, who is the head of the game, as well as the same musical composer, Hirokazu Tanaka. And while it may not be as fondly remembered as a lot of the other first-party Nintendo titles, Kid Icarus shares some great gameplay elements with The Legend of Zelda, Metroid, and even Mario. So here we go with Kid Icarus, the Angel Land story for the NES. While it may not look like it at first, Kid Icarus is actually a rather complicated game. It actually was one of the first games to feature multiple endings, 5 in the North American version and only 4 in the Japanese, as well as it has a pretty complicated scoring system that you must accomplish in order to actually get the different endings of the game. In Kid Icarus, we take control of a young angel named Pit. Pit was sent by the goddess of light, Palutena, to the underworld, where it's the lair of the evil goddess, Medusa. While Palutena would help out the people of the world, Medusa was looking to destroy them, by destroying their crops, as well as turning them into stone. So, Palutena banished Medusa into the underworld. However, Medusa didn't go quietly, and ended up capturing Palutena. With Palutena's last bit of ability, she summoned Pit, the young angel, and gave him a magic bow in order to go through the underworld and destroy Medusa. There are 4 different worlds for you to travel through in Kid Icarus, broken up into several stages each. You have levels like this where we're traveling from the bottom of the stage to the top, side-scrolling levels, a flying stage, as well as dungeon labyrinth-type levels. And if all that wasn't enough, the difficulty is actually pretty tough in Kid Icarus. You start off with only a little amount of health, and because of that, you can end up dying from enemies rather quickly. In order to gain yourself more health and have a better chance of surviving the enemies, you actually have to level up in the game. To do this, you actually have to have a certain number of score. At the end of a level, your score is tallied up, and if you surpass one of the different numbers that you need to for a level, you then gain the level. You can only do so at the end of a stage. You start off at level 1, so we have 4 stages to go to get our max amount of health. Every time you level up, you gain an extra piece of your health bar. There's also another way to level up, and that's with your strength. You start off with your basic strength with your basic arrows, but you can actually get other types of arrows by entering power-up rooms in the game. In order to get an upgrade for your arrow, you must enter a power room, which there's only a few of in the game. In order to max out your strength in one run of the game, you must enter all the available power-up rooms. There is one in the first stage, and it's actually the very first door in the whole game. However, if you enter it, there's no way for you to have enough skill in order to actually get the power upgrade. Now, for these skills, you actually have a weird variety of different things that affect it. You must have 10,000 skill in a level, then enter the door in order to receive the upgrade. Now, this is determined by a ton of different modifiers, so it's best for you really just to look up an FAQ to find out all the different little things that cause it. It's affected by which types of enemies you kill, whether you collect a mallet, whether you buy or collect an item, whether you break any of the glasses inside of the different treasure chambers in the game, as well as just entering rooms gives you different amounts of skill. You can also get a negative amount of skill, like I said, for breaking the jars, as well as firing an arrow, which you lose 10 different skill every time you fire an arrow, as well as taking damage from tiles such as lava. So were you able to get all that? Yeah, I know, it can be quite confusing, and I highly recommend looking at a guide, because that'll really give you the full list of details on the whole thing. Now, as far as the run goes, though, I'm going to try to do my best to show you, but everything I do is the best way so you can actually end up getting those skill points leveled up, so you can get all of the arrows and get the best ending to the game. In the end, though, only one of the arrow upgrade rooms is really hard to get to, and that's because it's really early on in the stage, so you don't have a whole lot of time to get skill points. Level 2, or Stage 1-2, is more of the same that we just saw in that first level, working our way from the bottom of the stage up to the top. Now this one contains pretty much the same variety of enemies that we've already been facing. So I do apologize for really not explaining much of the first level, as it's pretty straightforward, and you really are just trying to get the hang of everything. Besides the experience, the skill points, and all that, you also have a money system in the game. Now the money is represented in the upper left corner so you can see how much you have, and you can hold a total of 999. You actually have to do this in order to get the best ending in the game. But we also have to spend money in the game in order to buy certain items that we also need for the best ending, so you have to keep killing a lot of enemies to make sure you can max that out. Thankfully though, it's rather easy to do and we should have no problem doing it by the end of the game. You get big hearts for 10, half hearts for 5, as well as little tiny hearts for 1. Thankfully, early on in the game, most of the enemies, like the little snakes as well as the floating eyeballs, only take one hit to take out. And as we upgrade our strength by leveling up, we'll also be able to take them out easier and harder enemies easier in less shots. Here is one of the first shops of the game. Now in this shop, I'm just showing it off right now because unfortunately I don't have enough to really buy anything, but I want to show the different items that you can buy. One of them was a full amount of meter health back, which was the large glass vial. Now that would have refilled our health no matter how many segments of the health we currently have. The other two items were a barrel and a feather. Now if you grab the barrel, you'll actually get another segment of health, so you can actually have up to 8 instead of 7. Now also, the feather will allow you, if you fall down into a pit in one of the side-scrolling levels, you'll actually start floating upwards and be able to fly for a short period of time. You can only have one of the barrels at a time though. The hardest enemy early on is the Grim Reaper enemies. When they see you, they start screaming and running towards you, and when this happens, he ends up summoning spirits to come down and start attacking you as well. You can only attack the Grim Reaper from behind, and early on it's worth doing because he gives you a great amount of experience, as well as a big heart. You may have been noticing that I am skipping a lot of the doors available to go through in the game, but most of them contain the same things that we're seeing from other doors. Whether it's just a vast variety of random enemies to attack so we can get some money, one of the shops where we have to buy an item, or it contains one of those treasure chambers where you have the possibility of finding items in all the glass jars. Probably the absolute worst thing and hardest thing about the game when traveling upwards is that when the screen scrolls up, you can end up falling down into the vast gap below and you end up dying that way. So you have to be very careful, and when moving upwards, careful that you don't accidentally miss a platform you try to reach and fall into one of the open spaces now below you. Thankfully, the sides are open so you can travel from left to right, and you need to, in order to get up to higher platforms. Most enemies in the game are going to be killed in one shot, especially when we get our weapon upgrades. However, you can also get these enemies to keep spawning over and over again, so that you can end up getting a lot amount of hearts. Most of the time though, these enemies will only spawn a maximum of 3 times. So once you've defeated a certain group of enemies or one enemy 3 times, it's time to move on to the next little segment in order to collect more experience or more hearts. These jumping octopus type enemies are really the first enemy in the game that take multiple shots to take out. They can be a little annoying right now, but they grant you great experience, so it's actually a pretty good idea to let them spawn and try to take out as many of them as you can. If you pause the game, you'll actually get a good chance to look at your score so you can see how much more you need for the next level. Like I said before, there are multiple different levels, and they go by this. You start off at level 1, at 20,000 you go to 2, 50,000 3, 100,000 4, and finally 200,000 to reach level 5. But remember, you can only reach that once you've actually ended a stage. Entering this chamber here will grant us our first power-up as long as we have 10,000 skill before entering. That's what I was able to do by defeating some more of the enemies, especially these octopi enemies, near the end of the level. By grabbing the bronze arrow, we actually change color. We end up changing to green in this case, so not really a bronze color, but that's what the arrow's called. At the top, we take out another Grim Reaper enemy, as well as a few other little enemies if you want to, before entering the door and completing Stage 1-2. Stage 1-3 of the Underworld, as we now enter with our second level of experience and now our Bronze Arrow, is another one of the go from the bottom to the top levels. Trust me, it will get a little bit more variety as we go through. With the level up from gaining enough score, you can also see that our health bar is now a little bit longer. Unfortunately though, it doesn't grant us any more health that we already have, so we'll have to buy an item or find health throughout the stage in order to get more health back, which is another reason why the game can be really tough at times. Interestingly enough also about the game is that you actually have a password system. This was actually relatively new to games back then, and like Metroid, they actually had some hidden codes in the game that you could actually type in order to get certain upgrades. Now, unfortunately, when they re-released the game for the Virtual Console, this part was actually removed. You still had your normal randomly generated passwords, but the special cool ones that you can enter for like full max health or have invincibility were removed. And now, if all that wasn't enough for the best ending, we have one last thing we have to do for the best ending of the game, and that's the special weapons. To get these special weapons, you must complete training chambers. Now, there are a good amount of these in the game, so you actually have a good chance to get these different items. By completing a training chamber, you have the choice of picking up one of the three weapons: a protective crystal or a shield, a sacred bow which allows your arrows to travel further and faster, as well as fire arrows, which gives you a fireball which will actually rotate around every arrow that's fired. One last item that we won't be grabbing in the game, and actually can be grabbed by doing those different chambers that have all the pots in them, is the credit card item. Now this actually allows you to charge items onto like a credit card, but gives you a negative amount of money. Unfortunately, with this though, it can take a long time to get out of that negative amount of money and actually get back to earning positive money, so it's really not worth it to get the credit card, especially if you're going for the absolute best ending in the game, since we need 999 hearts in order to get that. Here's another great spot to take out the octopi enemies right here, so that you can grab some extra hearts and money, as well as get some experience. Thankfully, since we upgraded to level 2 and got the next arrow, we can take out these enemies with only one shot now. You can actually see that certain enemies will just keep spawning if you're lucky enough and give you a great opportunity to earn enough skill points or enough experience. Unfortunately though, you must collect the hearts or wait for them to disappear before they'll actually start respawning the enemies. And after a certain number of respawns, the enemies will eventually stop coming. Thankfully, we don't have to worry about getting another one of the arrows in this stage. We don't have to worry about that till level 2-1. The other two after that, though, are in 2-2, which that one is the really tricky one to get, as well as the one in 3-1, which is a lot easier to get than that one. It may seem a little bit annoying that I'm just kind of standing here fighting the same enemies, but it's needed in order to get my experience up so that I can level up when I complete each stage. If I'm lucky, I should have just enough experience almost to level up again to level 3 by the end of this stage. Here's a weird spot where you actually can get multiple snakes that keep falling down from the top platform and land right above you, so you can actually point upwards and just take them out easily with an arrow. While unfortunately the snakes don't give much experience, every little bit counts. While traveling through this area, it's a very nice confined area where it's not a whole lot of space that you can fall down and lose a life. So it's actually a great spot to be here, walk around, and be able to take out all the enemies that keep spawning over and over again. Once we reach the top, watch out for the Grim Reaper enemy, and then jump across the small platforms to the lava-filled platforms above. Be careful that you don't accidentally fall into the lava, as it will do a pretty good amount of damage to you over a period of time. So be careful and jump over to the right, going through the wall, so you can come out the left side and start jumping up the platforms. I have to be extremely careful right now because I only have that little slither of health left, but hopefully I can get some health as I continue upwards. Be careful here and don't go through the wall to the right until the Grim Reaper is facing the opposite direction and close to the door. If you're quick, you can sneak behind him and deliver some fast shots and take him out. Now here is the first of the training levels. Now like I said before, we needed to complete these training levels in order to get the 3 special weapons. This can be tricky, especially considering I only have 1 hit of health left. However, as long as you stay grounded to the bottom part of the screen, you won't have to do too much jumping to avoid the different panels that are flying towards you. I have to admit that this segment kind of feels a little bit like Legend of Zelda, especially in those levels like in Link to the Past where you have the ground come up and try to actually attack you in the rooms. It seems like the same pretty much enemy. After you're able to complete the segment, you get a well done congratulations and then your choice of the 3 items. The first one I'm picking is the rod, or the crystal. The crystal grants you an extra amount of defense. Unfortunately, right now I really can't test that out since I still only have 1 health, but be careful when you reach the top, watching out for another Grim Reaper enemy, then go through the exit to the right and complete stage 1-3. Thankfully, by doing so, I also had enough score from that stage to rack up another bonus level by reaching over 50,000 score. Stage 1-4 is the first of the Labyrinth type levels, a giant maze-like structure that you'll have to work your way through room after room in order to eventually reach the boss chamber and actually complete the level. This is the level where the game starts to get tougher for sure, because it's really a maze, and you're really not quite sure at all times where you're supposed to be heading. Thankfully, early on in this map, we actually get the map for this screen. You can look at the map by pausing it, and if you actually grab yourself the torch item from one of the shops, and I really don't recommend doing so, you can actually see where you're located on a particular map. While it's good for one map, you'll have to keep buying it in every one of the dungeons, so you'll have to buy the item a total of 3 times throughout the game. Thankfully, with the upgrades we've gotten, all the enemies here are pretty easy to contend with as far as hitting them, as there'll only be 1 shot for most of them. Once you know the path to get by in each of the dungeons, they really aren't as tricky, but that first time through, especially if you're trying to figure it out yourself without a walkthrough or video guide, they can be a real challenge. Over here we have one of the toughest enemies, and you'll be seeing them throughout the whole game, the Eggplant Wizard. Probably one of the most popular enemies from the Kid Icarus series, the Eggplant Wizard not only is a pain by moving back and forth and shooting eggplants at you. If you're hit by one of these eggplants, you end up getting it stuck on your head and actually have to go to one of the medical rooms to have it removed. You may also remember, if you were a fan of the Captain N show, that the Eggplant Wizard represented Kid Icarus on the show and was one of the main villains, along with King Hippo. One of the best areas in the whole dungeon is that in this room, you have a large pool, and by stepping inside, you can actually replenish your health. All you have to do is wait a few seconds while staying in it, and you'll end up gaining full health. This is great, especially if you were in the predicament that I was, having only 1 piece of health left before we end up making it to the boss chamber. Be very careful in these rooms because you'll have to deal with a lot of spikes coming out of the different platforms. So move through carefully and time your jumps correctly so you can end up making it past the spikes. This room here is a great room in case you want to rack up some money, as well as get some easy enemies to defeat. In this room, the Eggplant Wizards are a little hard to hit because they're on smaller platforms. But the good thing is, they throw their eggplants in an arcing pattern, so they end up going right over your head pretty much every time. When we enter this room, it's time for the first boss battle of the game. This three-headed creature is actually really easy to deal with. Stand next to this column and just keep firing. When the creature gets close to it, he'll just keep bouncing up and down on your arrows, and you should be able to get a ton of hits in before he's actually able to do any damage to you. As long as his fireballs don't hit you, he won't do damage. His body laying in you doesn't do any damage at all. Once you're able to drain all his health away, you can complete the stage and move on to World 2. World 2-1 starts off with the first of the side-scrolling levels. Also, by not being in one of the dungeons, we actually really get to see our defensive item really in work. The defensive item that we had grabbed earlier on in the game allows for these two crystals to fly around us and actually do damage to enemies and protect us from taking too much damage. However, you can't actually use these special items inside any of the Labyrinth dungeon area, so that's why you weren't able to see it earlier on. (2-1) contains one of those weapon rooms that we need to have a certain amount of skill to enter. One of the best ways to earn skill during the side-scrolling levels is the rocks that fall down. They fall down in a random pattern every time. However, if you're able to hit 2 or maybe even 3 sometimes, you'll be able to gain a lot of hearts if you need the money as well as a lot of skill points and experience. The ping jumping enemies can get a little bit annoying, but if you're able to pick up the guard shield like I was earlier on, you'll be able to hit most of them as they're jumping out immediately, and be able to avoid those that you actually don't have direct contact with. Instead of the eyeball enemies, we now have these flying plant-like enemies that fly around the screens in packs of 4. They're pretty much the same enemy, and we also can take them out with one shot with our bronze arrow. Stay in this area to take out some of the small snakes as well as get the rocks that keep spawning so you can gain experience from them. In this area, we have two choices. We can go on the upper path or the bottom path. Taking the upper path is a lot easier. There's no real enemies to contend with except for those that are jumping out from the bottom, and this way you'll have plenty of opportunity to dodge them and deliver shots to them. However, if you do need a little bit of health, you may want to take the bottom path because there is a glass down there which will replenish some of your health. Here is the room that you'll need to enter in order to get the next arrow upgrade. As long as you have enough of the skill points, as I explained earlier, you should be able to get the silver arrow. The silver arrow is once again more powerful than the bronze arrow, and it also changes our color scheme again, now changing us to a kind of purple-pink color. The next thing I'm going to do may seem a little bit weird. I'm going to buy a health item so that I can actually spend money, because I need to spend money in order to give myself some more skill points later on. Every time you grab a heart, you get a little bit of those skill points that allows you to end up getting the arrow upgrades. However, if you're maxed out of your hearts, you won't be able to get any skill points for collecting hearts. So, by wasting a little bit of my money by buying one of those health items, even though I have full health, I'll be able to grab enough skill points in order to get the item I need in the next stage. Be careful and jump along these singular platforms to the top door to enter another one of the training chambers. Just like the first one, you'll have to survive a barrage of different panels attacking you, but if you're able to do so, you'll grab another one of those weapon items. This time you can grab either the fireball or the bow and arrow, or in case you didn't grab the shield the last time, that'll also be here. I'll grab the better bow this time, so my arrows will actually travel farther, as well as they'll travel faster. The last item I will be grabbing then is the fireball item. Just take your time through the rest of the stage, jumping over the large pits of water, as well as using your guard as well as your new arrows to take out the rock enemies. When we reach the end, thankfully with the amount of experience I've gained, I'm actually able to get another level up by going over 100,000 total score. To get to that final level though, I'm going to have to double that and reach up to 200,000 to reach the final level of experience. Level 2-2 is the hardest stage in the game in order to get the arrow upgrade, so you have to do things a little bit tricky in order to actually get through. Start off by entering this room and take out all the pots. You do get a negative score for taking the pots out, however, the amount of items that we're gaining will give us actually a positive score by the time we leave the room. After we leave the room, jump over the water and avoid both of the next two doors. We don't want to enter either one of these doors, and we don't need to in order to get enough skill points. Keep jumping over the pits of water to the third door. Jump over it, but make sure it stays on screen and get the rocks to start falling down. Just be careful that you don't accidentally walk too far over to the right so that the door goes off screen, because we need this door. Once you've gotten rid of a good amount of the rocks, enter the door and you'll end up getting the next arrow upgrade. If you weren't able to get it here, you didn't defeat enough enemies or have a high enough skill point in order to actually get it. Once you grab it though, we now have the gold arrow, which actually changes our color to a brownish red. Entering here will allow us to replenish our health by jumping into one of the fountains. Thankfully, we have only one more arrow upgrade to grab, as well as we only have to level up one more time. The last of the arrow upgrades is in level 3-1, so we can take some time off from worrying about the skills. However, you still want to defeat a lot of enemies so you can get your experience total leveled up. Just do your best to avoid these enemies here. They just end up stealing stuff from you, and it's not worth actually taking them out, because you actually can't kill them. They just keep running through you no matter how many shots you deliver. This level as a whole is a little bit tough because there's a lot of jumping, especially on singular platforms, and with the giant vast array of water below you, it'll end up usually costing you a death. When you get to this spot here, it's a good area to keep getting these sets of 4 different creatures that keep spawning, so you can take them out and get a lot of experience. The game may seem rather boring that you have to keep fighting the same enemies over and over again so that you can get experience or score, but it ends up being rewarding enough that you at least can get another ending than just the normal one by doing this. Also, by gaining the levels, you have a great advantage in the later stages by having a full amount of health. Be careful with your jumping along these long platforms over the gap of water, as well as be careful of the plant-type creatures that are going to be trying to get you. The good thing is, though, if you stand on this top platform right here, it gives you a great vantage point for when the creatures come out of the right wall, that when they make their loop around on the left side, you'll be able to fire directly at them. This is probably the trickiest part of this stage, because there's a lot of up and down moving platforms, and you'll have to time your jumps accordingly, so you don't end up missing one and fall into the water. Over here we have another set of the up and down moving platforms, and then we're able to land on a solid platform before making it to another door. Pass the door and watch out for some more green frogs that are going to try to attack you. After a few series of these green frogs, as well as some of the pink jumping enemies, you'll finally reach the door and complete this stage. Stage 2-3 is another side-scrolling level, and it also happens to take place at night. We start off with a lot of the rocks falling down from the ceiling, which is a great set of enemies for you to rack up experience. The good thing about this level is there really isn't too much more to deal with. Instead of lava pits though, you do have these thorny pits instead to deal with. Other than that, you're pretty much dealing with the same amount of enemies, and if you were able to make it past the platforming in the previous stage, you should have no trouble in this one. This also is a great level for you to reach the last amount of score that you need, so you can get over the 200,000 mark so you can get your final level up. Here we have one of those lava pits. Jump up to the platform, and then you can stand still on the singular platform to wait for the next one. This enemy right here, this weird snow-like creature, is rather easy to deal with, but he gives you a good amount of experience, so it's a good chance for you to level up here by killing him a few times each time you can get him to spawn. He also moves so slow, and you can actually duck under his projectile, that it makes him even easier to contend with. This area here is a little bit congested with the amount of platforms, so it can limit your jumping, but you really don't have to worry too much because the enemies here are going to be those falling rocks, as well as one of those pots that drop the little snakes. A little bit over to the right, you'll have a couple sets of the frogs in a row before the next set of the stage. Here's another one of those opportunities where you have either an upper or lower path to take, and once again, the upper path ends up being the best one to take because there's a little less amount of enemies as well as a little bit less perils to deal with. You have some of those vines that you can actually jump in between the gaps of the vines so you can make it over to the next platform without landing in it. Be careful here that you jump to the platform and then over to the next platform quickly enough so that while it's rising up and down, you don't accidentally rise or fall into those different amounts of vines. Here we have some more of those thief enemies. Just try to stay on the top platform and avoid them the best that you can. Right here we have a large amount of water that has these little individual platforms. Just be careful when moving across them, and once you reach the next side, you have a few frogs and the door to make it to 2-4. If you were able to gain enough score during that level, you may be able to get over the 200,000 total score that you need in order to level up and gain the final level of experience that you need and have now your maximum amount of health. 2-4 is another one of the Labyrinth areas where we have to reach a boss at the end of the stage. While traveling through the dungeon, you may have to use a mallet item in order to break blocks. If you do so, you may end up finding this guy, and if you're able to find him, he actually will come back and help you during the boss fight. Once again, like the last Labyrinth, the enemies aren't too difficult except for the Eggplant Wizards, which will take multiple hits still to kill even with our maxed out equipment pretty much. However, the hardest thing really ends up being just navigating the maze altogether and trying to find the boss. This Labyrinth, other than the last one, has a lot more of these spike rooms with the spikes coming out. You just have to be careful and take your time through and jump at the right moments, and you should be able to avoid getting hit by the spikes. Be very careful when walking through this room that you don't accidentally get hit by one of the eggplants that are going to be falling down. You'll have to find one of those medical rooms in case you do get an eggplant on your head. The good thing is, the next room, if you did take damage from other enemies so far, you can replenish your entire health by finding one of the fountains. I mentioned earlier about the shops inside the dungeons that have items. The torch item I mentioned earlier about how that it gives you your spot on the map if you found the map for that dungeon. However, you'll have to re-buy it every time you get to another labyrinth. As for the pencil item, It actually makes every room you visited on your map turn green. However, once again, it doesn't carry over to the other labyrinths, and you really could just kind of make your own little map if you really wanted to. Thankfully, now that I've reached the maximum amount of score I need for my levels, I don't actually have to worry about fighting any enemies, so I'm just going to be running through a lot of this labyrinth really quickly. We've seen this room a lot, and definitely coming from the top part of the room down is a little bit trickier than going upwards, but still, just wait for the spikes to go back in and you should have no problem. After dealing with the Eggplant Wizards and climbing up this ladder, we have one more room before we enter the boss's lair. This boss is a lot tougher than the previous one because he actually moves around and you can't try to get him really stuck easily. If you found the little guy earlier, he'll actually come and help you out and keep firing every time you do. Unfortunately though, once he gets in contact with the boss just one time, he falls off screen and you end up losing him. Even though this boss is tougher than the previous one, it's still a very easy boss battle because he has no projectiles whatsoever and he just keeps bouncing around the room. So, do your best to either jump up or stay on the platform below, and just keep firing every time his head comes into your range. It'll take a little while to drain down his health, but you shouldn't have too much trouble doing so. Once he's taken care of, we complete the stage and we move on to the third world of the game. The third world starts us off in another one of those types of levels where we have to go from the bottom to the top of the screen. Thankfully, if you took damage during the boss fight in the previous level, the first door you come to on the far right side is actually one of those fountains to replenish your health. This is the final stage that contains one of the arrow upgrades. So this is the last time we're really going to have to spend time fighting any enemies, so that we can get enough skill points so we can get that last arrow. If you picked up the shield by now, you shouldn't have too much trouble with some of the newer enemies, especially these soldier-type enemies that fly and have other enemies rotating around them. By just doing a little jump up into them, you should be able to just clip them with one of your two floating diamonds. This part here can be a little bit tricky because you have to do a lot of jumping on single platforms, so just take your time so you don't fall and end up dying. Be careful here while fighting the Grim Reaper enemy that he doesn't accidentally cause you to fall down here, and you'll have to wait for the platform to circle around and come back from the right side so you can jump up and then get up to the next set of platforms. These flying guard enemies can be a little bit annoying because they fly in a kind of sporadic pattern when they come down and they fly off screen towards you usually, so just try to do your best to either hit them or just jump over and avoid them. You may have to wait on this platform for a little bit for the platform to come from the left side of the wall, so that you can jump up to it and be able to get up to the next set of platforms. The good thing is, though, there are some snake enemies that will keep spawning for a little bit, so you can rack up some skill points so that you can make sure that you can get the arrow coming up very shortly. The door on the left contains the final power-up chamber for the arrows. Standing here will allow some enemies to spawn up from the ground so you can take them out and get the extra little bit of skill you may need before entering the door and grabbing the final arrow upgrade. Once we grab it, we change from a red color to kind of a light blue color. We now have everything but one item to grab in the game in the final training chamber that we'll have to enter. Enter the door on the right here, you complete the stage and move on to 3-2. 3-2 contains the final training chamber that we'll need to enter so that we can grab the fire arrow and we have everything that we need in order to get the best ending of the game. This is by far the trickiest stage that we've gone to so far, because there's a lot of platforms that I have to go off-screen on one side or the other, and then come back around so that you can jump on them and get up to the next set of platforms. This can be a little bit tricky, and you have to be very careful because, of course, falling at any point to the open gap below will cause you to die. Be sure to climb up the center area here and enter the red door because this is the final training chamber. Just like the previous ones, all that's going to happen is a whole lot of panels are going to start flying at you. Thankfully, with the upgraded equipment that we have, it really shouldn't be too difficult, and the guards surrounding you, the little diamonds, should be able to take out anything that you miss with your arrows. After completing it, we grab the fireball item and we now have every item in the game. When we get up here, we have a weird enemy that spawns for the first time. It really looks like they took a sprite directly out of the original Metroid and put it into Kid Icarus. Thankfully though, these Metroid-like enemies aren't as difficult as they would be in Metroid and should be taken out easily with one shot. Since we've been able to level up completely, get all the equipment that we need, the last few levels of the game end up being rather easy. The only difficult part is really going to be the jumping from platforms, which would be difficult no matter what, as well as, of course, navigating that final labyrinth that we have coming up in 3-4. But as far as dealing with all the enemies and all, you shouldn't have too much trouble. Entering this room is another one of those fountains so that we can replenish our health. By doing so, we also activate the fireball ability we picked up earlier. We now have all the equipment equipped at one time. Every time we now fire an arrow, a little fireball will also go out with it, destroying enemies as well. Jump up a couple more platforms and enter the door, and you complete 3-2. 3-3 is the final one of the levels that goes from bottom to top. 3-4 is a labyrinth, and the final level of the game is actually a side-scrolling shooter level. We once again have a lot of the really small platforms to contend with, and you'll have to deal with the other platforms that move from one side of the screen to the other, sometimes overlapping and coming back out the other side. Once we get up here, the platforms start to become longer, so you have less chance of accidentally falling off. Continue working your way up and passing from the right to left side sometimes so you can continue moving forward. Be careful of the Grim Reaper enemy coming up here on the top, because you'll have to wait for him to really turn around so you don't accidentally run into him and have him turn around and start screaming in your face. Once we reach the top here, enter the door on the right and you complete the level. 3-4 is the final labyrinth stage of the game. We travel down the first ladder and be careful that you don't accidentally run into one of the Eggplant Wizards below. Keep heading down another couple ladders so that you can go into the door on the left here. The worst thing, though, about these labyrinth levels is not only is it a maze, but all the equipment that you gathered, including the shield and the fire arrows, you lose that during these segments. We have another set of these spike rooms that we saw earlier on in the game in the second labyrinth. They're pretty much the exact same speed, so just take your time like before and you should have no trouble. The only enemies that you'll really have to take out during this whole labyrinth, since you have all the upgrades, is just those that will get immediately in your way so they don't end up running into you. The worst threat through the labyrinths, like always, is definitely the Eggplant Wizard, so try to do your best not to get an eggplant on your head, because we don't feel like traveling to one of the hospitals at this point. Remember, if you get that eggplant on your head, you also lose the ability to fire, so it becomes essential that you end up finding those medical centers, so you can end up getting the eggplant removed. This shop is actually conveniently placed right before the boss, so if you have any health taken away from you, you may want to buy one of the health items here, so you can replenish your health back to full. This boss is probably the toughest in the game as far as the labyrinth bosses go, because the other two, you gotta admit, really weren't too difficult. This large bubble face will keep bouncing around the room rather slowly, and when he comes near you, you'll get the opportunity to fire some shots at him. He has a couple of other bubbles that bounce around the room as well, and they move a little bit quicker than him, but actually it ends up being another simple boss battle. Just try to do your best to dodge the bubbles and fire when you have the opportunity. There's no projectiles other than the two bouncing bubbles, so it really isn't too tricky. Once you defeat the boss, you complete the stage, rack up your score, and it's time for the final level of the game. 4-1 is a side-scrolling type level as we make our way to the final encounter with Medusa. You can see before the level begins, we equip ourselves with the 3 treasures that we found at the end of each labyrinth. Interestingly enough, this level is actually vastly different in the Japanese version of the game than it is in the North American. In the Japanese version, you actually have to force the screen to keep scrolling over, you actually have to keep pressing the jump button to stay in flight, as well as some of the platforms that we'll be seeing later on in the level are actually solid and stop you from being able to move. One of the worst things about this level, though, is enemies can kind of just spawn randomly at a given time, so if you're not careful, they may end up spawning right over top of you and end up running into you, causing you to lose some health. Even though I've never actually played the Japanese version, I'm gonna assume it's the brick pattern in the background that normally you wouldn't be able to travel through if you were playing the original Japanese version of the game. Thankfully, they made the game a lot easier in the North American version, as these platforms as well would also probably be getting in the way. Thankfully, all the enemies during this stage are killed with just one shot from the arrow, as well as your arrow can actually travel through enemies and take out other ones behind it. So you don't have to fire more than one if you have enemies in a straight line. Also, most of the enemies don't come directly at you or fire any sort of projectile at you, so most of them are really easy to contend with. These enemies that stand still on top of one of the platforms do fire projectiles, so it can be a little bit tricky to get down far enough and in a direct shot with them so that you can actually hit them. As we reach the purple background with the purple bricks, we know that we're getting very close to Medusa's lair, so be very careful during this segment so you don't lose any unnecessary health. As we draw close to Medusa, the enemy below us will disappear, and it's time for our boss battle with Medusa. Stand still right at this spot, and you should be able to hit all the little snakes that she summons to attack you with, and avoid all of her projectile beams. This will allow you just to keep firing direct shots at Medusa's eye, and you should be able to defeat her in little to no time. Once she's defeated, you'll see Medusa fall over and you can enjoy the ending, the Kid Icarus. So there you have the best ending, the Kid Icarus for the NES. Now that version of the ending is actually different than the best ending in the Japanese version. In the Japanese version, you do become a fully grown adult angel, however, Palutena does not deliver the kiss to Pit, as well as you don't have the angels flying overhead in the celebration. All the other endings to the game are pretty similar, except that one actually has the whole kissing as well as the other angels. The other ones just have Pit transform, and that's the end of the game right there. He transforms depending upon what level you got, including the lowest form is just him kind of standing there with a hat and a sickle in his hand, I assume just becoming a normal farmer. While Kid Icarus isn't the most fondly remembered of the NES classic games produced by Nintendo themselves, it's still a very fun game and is really enjoyable to play. Unfortunately though, the series never really took off, and they only made one sequel after this one for the Game Boy, before eventually doing the resurrection of Pit in Super Smash Bros. Brawl, as well as the new game being released for the Nintendo 3DS. Hopefully, from here on out, Pit isn't forgotten like he used to be, and we'll be seeing many more games in the future from Nintendo, starring the Kid Icarus star Pit. And with that, that's going to wrap up this edition of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.